Welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. The Gaza war has, of course, been a key focus of our coverage over the past year. As we detailed with Nicole before the break, it started with Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups breaking through the Gaza-Israel barrier that day, massacring over 1,000 Israelis and taking hundreds more hostage. The surprise terrorist attack igniting an increasingly complex war that's already ugly and has brought an unwavering fear that it could still get bigger and uglier. We have been covering this all day today. We know that tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians are dead in Gaza. The death toll is rising in Lebanon as well. We've been covering the fact that this is a wide-ranging war at this point. The IDF making real progress, though, in crippling two of its biggest regional terrorist foes, Iran-backed Hamas and Hezbollah. We're going to go in depth with three panels of guests tonight. And for the first, I want to focus solely on Gaza. Hal Kempfer is a retired Marine intelligence officer, and Alon Burstein is a researcher, visiting assistant professor, and Israel Institute fellow at Tufts University. You guys, we get into the weeds so often with all of our coverage here, but I want to take a bigger picture approach today. I want to talk about some of the larger ideas that are keeping this war in our focus a year on. So let's get straight into it. Obviously, Alon, the Washington Post reported that on October 7th, instructions found on dead Hamas fighters included kill as many people and take as many hostages as possible. Why did Hamas feel the need to carry out such a grisly attack, even when they had to know that it would prompt a punishing response from Israel?
It's good to see you, Austin, and nice to see you, Hal. We have to tackle that question from two different angles. There is the macro angle of Hamas's ideology. Hamas is an organization that the interest of destroying Israel because it wants to establish an Islamic Palestinian state. And that is one of the key facets of that movement, setting it apart from other movements. It's separate from Palestinian nationalist movements who just want a Palestinian state. It's also different than ISIS or Al-Qaeda, who want a purely Islamic caliphate. They want a Palestinian Islamic state. For that, they need to achieve the destruction of Israel. So that's sort of the macro, why we can't expect them to actually be pursuing peace and pursuing some sort of coexistence with Israel on the macro. However, at the same time, it's also important to remember Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007. We also know they're very capable of thinking strategically, thinking from a tactical perspective. They did this specifically in order to achieve something. I would argue that they wanted to achieve, two or three things, but very briefly. One, they wanted to reposition themselves in a stronger position internally in Palestinian politics. They wanted to challenge the Palestinian Authority and put themselves in a stronger position to maybe take over the West Bank. Two, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip at the time, now of the entire Hamas movement, really sees himself as committed to releasing Palestinian prisoners, and carrying out such an attack and such a kidnapping would be the best way to do that. And three, one of the things we have to remember, and I'll just say this very briefly, Hamas did not expect to succeed as much as they did. They did not actually know that they would be so successful. Their plans were slightly different. They thought that only a few units would get through and that possibly they would hold an Israeli town or two and negotiate it then. Obviously, they could have known that Israel would have a harsh retaliation, but the extent to which they succeeded / to which the Israeli Defense Forces failed was something even they did not predict. So all those things came together on October 7th.
So, Hal, Hamas attacks on October 7th. It catches Israel completely off guard. About 1,200 Israelis killed, over 200 people kidnapped, taken back to Gaza as a hostage. Some of those people were taken as corpses. What do we know about how Hamas planned this under the radar without anybody catching it? And what do we know about how Israeli intelligence failed that day?
Well, Austin, the biggest thing is they picked up on a lot of things. In retrospect, when they went back and did the full examination of what happened, the indicators, the warning, it was all there. But the political, and this happens. We've had the same problem here in the U.S. over and over again. The intelligence is there, but it doesn't fit the mindset of some of the leadership. They didn't want to be distracted with a Hamas threat, so it wasn't given the proper regard that it should have, and therefore they were, frankly, they were caught off guard. This is one of the most embarrassing moments in Israeli history. I mean, this really does rank up there with Yom Kippur, if not bigger than Yom Kippur, and I think it is bigger myself in terms of strategic surprise that Israeli suffered. They did see a lot of the training. One of the things that came out of this was they were training for a very long time. One of the questions I had immediately after the attack is, where did they do the paraglider training? And it turns out they were doing some of it actually in the Gaza Strip. That rather surprised me that wasn't immediately flagged, because anybody who knows special operations, and believe me, the IDF knows special operations, would immediately see that and say, okay, I have a pretty good idea of what they're planning to do there. That's not a recreational thing that they're doing in the Gaza Strip. So they had a plan. They went out there, but I agree with Alon that they really they achieved far more than they thought they would. I will say one thing though, surprisingly, especially with Yahya Sinwar, considering how long he'd been in custody, Israeli custody, the fact that he actually learned Hebrew while he was there, reportedly fluent in Hebrew, a complete cross-cultural miscommunication or a failure to assess Israeli psychology. You do something like that with Israel, Israel is going to respond. That's the history of Israel. They respond hard. And for Hamas, of course, this will be a probably criminal misjudgment on their end doing something like this.
There from Matt Dixon that.
So, and we apologize for the audio interruption there, but Alon, I got to ask you this. The IDF officially, and we're moving along the timeline here, the IDF officially starts its large-scale ground incursion into Gaza on October 27th, just shy of 3 weeks after the initial attack. They start from the north, and they work their way south. Hamas terrorists are being eliminated in the meantime. They've largely embedded themselves in tunnels and in some of the most vulnerable parts of civilization. Strikes around hospitals happen, strikes at schools happen, civilians are dying, and hostages are still in captivity. But that brings me to my next thing. In late November, Israel and Hamas, they approved a deal mediated by Qatar, the U.S., and Egypt and the U.S. To exchange 150 Palestinian prisoners for 50 hostages. It also approved an agreement for a 4-day ceasefire in Gaza at the time, the ceasefire commencing on the 49th day of the war. Looking back, Alon, does it feel like this was the most optimistic point in a year of war?
So, yes, I'll say two things. One, just a note. I know we're going to maybe talk about the ongoing war in Gaza later. The IDF invaded the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. It did not actually progress down south. It bypassed central parts of the Gaza Strip and later invaded sort of from the south to take Khan Yunis and Rafah. That's only important because within the Gaza Strip right now, there's still the central parts of the Gaza Strip the IDF has never invaded, and it's not hard to predict that the IDF probably has plans for that maybe in the near future. So putting that out there, the IDF has not taken over the entire part of the Gaza Strip up until now. In response to your question of was this the most optimistic moment, I would say yes, but not only because a truce was brokered between the sides. More importantly, because that truce, as you said, was supposed to be a 4-day truce, the exchange of 50 Israeli hostages for 150 Palestinian prisoners. However, the truce also had within it another clause that said this can be extended and Hamas can, quote unquote, buy itself another day of truce if it releases another 10 hostages, and then in turn, Israel will release another 30 Palestinian prisoners and continue to increase humanitarian aid and the truce. And that continued. That continued for 2 more days, and Hamas even tried to extend it by another day, saying they don't have 10 female hostages. That was the deal at that time. They could supply 7 female hostages and 3 male hostages. Israel didn't agree to that at that moment. However, the fact that for 2 more days, seemingly the foes that are out to kill each other, Israel and Hamas, managed to say we've agreed on a 4-day truce, but actually our interests converge at this moment. At this moment, more hostages will be released, Israel's interest. There will be an extended truce, Hamas's interest. Palestinian prisoners will be released, Palestinians' interests. Somehow, the sides managed to agree to tacitly extend this truce for 2, almost 3 days, those to me were the most optimistic moments of the entire last year. Not the fact that they agreed, foes agree in war, but that if it was extended, both sides recognized, actually, let's just keep this going. It's working well. That was the optimistic moment at the end of November.
So I got to also just keep the timeline moving here. Early 2024 saw the IDF continue its campaign, destroying Hamas battalions. By late February, the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry said 30,000 Gazans had been killed. It's currently above 40,000 as of today. It's important to mention, though, that that number does not distinguish between militants and civilians. Also in February, Biden publicly calling the IDF's campaign over the top. It was a hot mic moment. He kind of said it matter-of-factly at the time. Moving on to early March, several countries start airdropping aid into Gaza. A first aid ship from Cyprus arrives on March 15th. Then moving into April, 7 aid workers from the U.S. charity World Central Kitchen are killed in an Israeli airstrike, which they called a tragic mistake. Hal, Israel faced a large amount of international pressure from their chief allies. Is it fair to say that Israel has done a lot in the past year that the U.S. didn't want it to do, yet they didn't face any serious repercussions from the White House as a result?
Well, we have a strategic relationship with Israel that goes back literally to the beginning of Israel, and it's a very close relationship. It's our largest in terms of military aid. Israel historically has always been the largest recipient of it, and we've always worked very closely with Israel. That's just one of the things that's about the firmament, if you will, of the Middle East is our relationship with Israel. So with that, yes, there was criticism within the context of not trying to show a rift, if you will, in U.S. support for Israel. And sometimes it gets to be somewhat of a delicate rhetorical dance in terms of what happens. And you do get some hot mic moments, like you heard President Biden saying. With that, I think Yahya Sinwar, Hamas believed this was going to be like before. They thought, okay, we're going to go out and do this big terrorist attack, and then we're going to run back into the Gaza Strip, and then Israel's going to go in there and look at this this massive urban warfare challenge before it and trying to root out Hamas from this tunnel complex and all these urban structures, and the fact that they've embedded themselves in not just in around civilians, but also in protected sites under international laws like schools and mosques and hospitals, and that Israel get in there and they'll take pressure from the international community and they'll pull out. Historically, that's kind of been true. In this case, it was absolutely not true. Again, I think they completely misread the mindset, certainly of Netanyahu, but they misread the scope of what they did, and Israel fully went in there and kept going. And I think the U.S. grudgingly has come to realize that Israel's just, they thought maybe they can get this to stop. The problem Israel has is Hamas poses an existential threat, if you will. As Alon said, Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. It's not, they don't want independence for Gaza so much, or independence for the West Bank. They're not the two-state solution. They want to drive all Israelis, all Jews in Israel, into the sea. That's always been something that has been something of an anomaly, if you will, within the terrorism movement. They're not like Al Qaeda. They don't want a caliphate. They're not like ISIS. If they want a caliphate, they want a Palestinian caliphate, and they want it to take over area that is now Israel. And they've shown the type of threat, the scope of the threat that they can pose. And so I think that really is as much criticism as there was there. I think that, very quietly, there was a lot of discussion saying, look, this is not going to end until Hamas is eliminated as a threat. And that has a lot loaded into that assessment.
We got to take a commercial break here in a moment, but I want both of you to answer a question before we do. In that last question, I referenced the Gaza Ministry of Health and their death toll figures. So there's been this looming question as to how credible is a Hamas-run entity when it's reporting casualty figures within Gaza alone. I'll let you take it first.
Okay, I'll tell you, this is my feeling about, if I misheard that, sorry, Alon.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, my feeling on this is that look, I work a lot of stuff to include homeland security issues, and I look at hurricanes, earthquakes, storms, terrorist attacks, you name it. There is no way we or any major country in the world ever gets the casualty numbers as precise and as broken down as the Gaza Ministry of Health. Particularly earlier in the war, they would say this many people were killed, this many were women and children. It just doesn't work that way. You can't do it. It's like, how can they do this in a situation as chaotic as Gaza and put these numbers out there? And we can't do it. And we have all these other resources that we can put into it. Really simple. They have something on the board, and it's been shown mathematically a couple different places. They said, it's amazing that the numbers of casualties stayed very consistent day after day, yet the number of strikes seem to vary a lot. So I have real questions, and I always have had questions in the fidelity of anything put out by the Ministry of Health, particularly because they are an arm of Hamas.
Alon?
So in this, I have to slightly disagree and take an unpopular opinion. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, historically, when it came to the escalations of 2009, 2014, 2021, when looked at in hindsight after the escalations died out, their figures largely proved themselves to some extent, and that because they are different than the Hamas Ministry of Communications or the other ministries that the UN was citing, which are the ministries that do try to actually say these many women, these many children. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip has historically only reported on the amount of bodies that come through the Palestinian hospitals. Moreover, one of the things that I found very illuminating is Israel itself. Israel itself has never published how many Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip, largely, I think, because Israel doesn't know. However, one of the only times that Israel alluded to that was at the end of March, when Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said, in his estimate at the time, roughly 13,000, 14,000 Palestinian militants have been killed in the Gaza Strip, and that he also estimates that the ratio of militants to civilians is 1-to-1, or 1 militant per 1.5 Palestinian civilians. So that would bring the total number, militants and civilians, at that time to between 26,000 and 32,000. That is about what the Palestinian Health Ministry was reporting at that time. They were themselves reporting at that moment 30,500, I believe. So with that, the fact that Israel itself was also citing largely a number that's within the range that the Palestinian Health Ministry was citing, I don't think that everything they say, like Hal said, I don't think that everything they say at the moment the airstrike happens, okay, this is how many people were killed, and we know that for a fact. But broadly, I do tend to trust their numbers as a trend of where the war is going and what's going on in the Gaza Strip. My take.
We got to take a break. More with Hal and Alon when we return. Welcome back in. Panel still standing by. Hal Kempfer, Alon Burstein. There's still much more that I want to get into, including a very important part to this story, the destruction in Gaza. For much of this war, the humanitarian situation in Gaza has been grim, to say the least. An unfathomable amount of people have been displaced, food scarcities, illnesses like polio have emerged, death. Alon, how important is the humanitarian piece of this when we tell the story of the past year?
So obviously it depends, who you ask, right? One of the facets that I often get asked when I'm giving guest lectures at universities is, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about the war? And what I keep on telling people is the fact that everyone thinks the thing that's most important to them should be most important to everyone. For a lot of people, the hostages is the most important thing. For some people, the amount of bombs that were dropped is the most important thing. For a lot of people, the humanitarian situation is the most important thing. So first of all, the humanitarian situation drives emotions. It drives emotions, it's driving people. And when we tell the story of the war, whoever's telling that story may very well focus on specifically that facet of the war. And that's understandable. We all find each facet to be the most important one. That said, we have seen the humanitarian situation be one of the crucial facets of how Israel actually tries to run the war because of the international pressure. The humanitarian situation throughout the war has gone through many different phases. However, like you mentioned, after the A truck incident at the end of February, in which 100 to 120 Palestinians were killed, very controversial what happened. I'll just say, fact is, they were killed trying to get to A trucks. Then the killing of the World Central Kitchen workers. Israel was forced to change the way it ran the war. It was simply forced to change the way it was going to actually allow aid in. In the same way, when Israel invaded Han Yunis, the United States told Israel explicitly, you cannot order an evacuation of all of Han Yunis the way you did in northern Gaza. Why? Humanitarian reasons. All these things have been very influential in the war. And one more point I'll just say, something that's often overlooked because it's looked at maybe as some sort of international joke, but it actually is very important. The International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice, much as Israel likes to belittle the influence of the United Nations, Israel really does care. And we can see that in the fact that the International Court of Justice, in response to South Africa's lawsuit, issued injunctions to Israel. And one of them was, you cannot withhold any aid from coming into Gaza. Lo and behold, within about a month, Israel's opening up entry points from all over the Gaza Strip, allowing air paradropping missions. This is the same Israel that had a siege on Gaza, wouldn't let any air units come in. All of a sudden, paradropping missions from Jordan, United Arab Emirates are coming in. The story of the humanitarian situation is not only that people care, it has had a big impact on the way the war is run, I would say.
Another important piece to this, the hostages. Let's move to May. By this point, the IDF, which, remember, was working its way south and had made its way, and I'll also just kind of preface this by saying we're going to just kind of continue moving along the timeline here. So we're at May at this point. The IDF, which was working its way south, had made it to basically the southernmost point of Gaza, the city of Rafah, coming into focus. On May 7th, the Israeli army launches a ground offensive in Rafah, where a majority of the territory's civilians had sought shelter. The IDF going into Rafah, destroying battalions, tunnels, and they've since doubled back, ordering evacuations and working through other parts of Gaza again. Where do we stand on the IDF's progress eliminating Hamas, Hal? It seems they've combed nearly the entire strip, killed high-profile figures. A few questions here. Where are the remaining hostages? Where is Hamas's top man, Yahya Sinwar? And how much of Hamas is even left, Hal?
Well, in terms of the as an organized military force, battalion level structure, certainly any brigade level structure or something like that. As of last week, the IDF had said pretty much that's gone. They cannot see any big organized Hamas battalions or anything higher than a battalion there. What that means is they're fighting kind of like a guerrilla force, if you will. I'm not saying you wouldn't find 100 or a couple of hundred of Hamas fighters in some sort of organized unit, if you will, working an area, but you're just not going to see these big units like they had at the beginning of the war. And the last two battalions that were basically, I hate to say eliminated, basically made combat ineffective, if you will, were in the Rafah area. They did systemically work through it, taking out the Hamas units. And Alon is correct. They didn't go all the way from the north to the south. One of the advantages Israel had is they completely surround this very small territory called Gaza. So therefore, they can bypass certain areas and then come in and flank them. And of course, these are all difficult tactical decisions based on the intelligence at the time. And that's how they prosecuted the war. Now, of course, they got to go back and deal with all these stay behind units, if you will, these guerrilla forces, and that's what they're doing up north, up around Gaza City in the northern part of Gaza right now, is they're methodically moving, place by place. Now, where are the hostages? Oh, I wish I knew. We don't know. It's been a kind of a guessing game that many of them are being held in tunnels based on the, part of the best intelligence on this is talking to the hostages that were actually released in November. They have a better sense of where they were than anybody else. So, they're getting moved from house to house. They're being held in tunnels. In some cases, they're literally being held in hospitals, which are protected, sites under international law. So, don't know. I honestly, and that's the problem, is I don't think the IDF really has great intelligence. You know, with all the whiz bang intelligence capabilities, all the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance tools at our disposal, if you have somebody being held underground, 60 feet below ground, there's not a lot that we have that can actually pick up on that person down there. It's human intelligence more often than not will tell you where they are. And then these are tunnels that are booby trapped and everything. So that's the problem they're having, is where are the hostages? And on Yahya Sinwar, that's a good question. There's still a lot of thought that he may not be with us anymore. There's a lack of communication. There's been reports that he was moving around, but I've never seen a report to say they were having any substantive degree of communication with them. So it's been kind of a question, which is where is Yahya Sinwar? Certainly underground is a pretty safe bet, but with that, if you look at the degradation of command and control of Hamas forces throughout the Gaza Strip, it would indicate that they have a lot of leadership gaps, if you will, that have not been addressed, and that may be that's probably the biggest gap. If he is gone, I'm not, and the IDF and certainly Israel has said they have not assessed that he is dead, although they have not come back and proven that he is still alive. So that's a good question.
So I'd like to, Austin, if it's okay, I just want to add.
I got to ask you, Alon, about the breakdown of the hostage situation, because a number of them we know are confirmed dead, correct?
A number of them are confirmed dead. Can I just add one more thing in response to what Hal said, just adding to that? That was true. Today, though, there were reports in Saudi Arabia, in Al Hadath, and a couple of places that Yahya Sinwar has made contact with the negotiators in Qatar. And in Israel, it was confirmed that that is the current belief, that he, in fact, has made contact. So, again, that doesn't mean that Israel knows, but the current assessments as of a few hours ago are that he is still alive. Otherwise, I completely agree with we don't know where he is, and the leadership gaps, that was something that just came in a few hours ago. So just adding to that.
And I got to ask, because what is the breakdown of the hostage situation as well? That's perhaps the most important piece to this.
So there are currently still 101 hostages that remain in the Gaza Strip, kidnapped right now a year ago. Of them, 36 are confirmed dead by the IDF. That means that the IDF has gathered enough intelligence to say they are in fact dead, and in negotiations, they are being treated as dead. However, most intelligence estimates that have been published, at least, suggest that at least half of them, if not more, between 50 and 55, are in fact dead. That's already half or more than half. And Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu pretty much confirmed that this is the estimate when he was speaking in a committee in the Knesset 2 weeks ago. He pretty much said, what we're dealing with, what we're negotiating, is for half of the hostages that we estimate are alive. And that is crucial not only for, obviously, the human factor of these individuals who were kidnapped and ended up dying in the Gaza Strip, but more than that, that becomes critical when it comes to hostage negotiations. There is a reason that Hamas has refused to give a list of who is alive and who is dead, because, sorry to be grim, it's a matter of numbers. A live hostage is worth much more. And Hamas is holding the cards very close to their chest to not let Israel know, officially, as far as Hamas knows, is this a body? Is not. You can guess Israel all you want. We're not going to divulge who's alive and who's dead, because live hostages are worth more when it comes to exchange for Palestinian prisoners. That's the game.
So let's wrap this up here. Alon, truce talks have been failing recently. This war has no end in sight. How does a war end? And what are the possibilities for this thing coming to a close? The U.S. says that it's in favor of a two-state solution, but we all know that the path to getting there is a complete unknown. In your opinion, and I'll let Hal answer this as well, but let's start with you, Alon. Is there enough public, high-level discussion about how to bring this thing to an end and about what happens afterward?
So I think, and you and I have spoken about this, privately off the air in the past also, I think that there's two different channels that are often discussed, and they rarely meet. One is the sort of macro, what is our agenda? The macro, our agenda could be a two-state solution. For Hamas, it could be a one-state solution in which Israel doesn't exist. For many forces in Israel's government, it could be a one-state solution in which Palestine doesn't exist. Those are macro visions. They have nothing to do with how do we get there. right? The October 7th attack was not going to destroy Israel, much as it did damage. And similarly, Palestinians are not just going to disappear. In the same way, those advocating a two-state solution, okay, what happens to Hamas? In the proposal for the ceasefire and end to the war, there was no talk of what happens after that. It was just a ceasefire and end to the war. Okay, then what? How do you get to a two-state solution? So there are those who focus on the macro vision and say, this is what I want at the end. The process doesn't matter. Then there are those who are sort of married to the process. Those who are saying, okay, I want to do grassroots initiatives in order to create cooperation on the ground. Those who are saying, okay, I want to actually try to work on the ground in order to make sure that the situation improves, however we define improves is, thinking about the process, not really looking at the macro. The problem is those two rarely meet in terms of thinking about also a vision and how do we get to that vision. To give you a more concrete answer, and I'll keep it brief because I don't want to get to Hal, to give you a more concrete answer to how does this end, chances are, unless there's some critical juncture that we can't see, Yahya Sinwar, someone in Israel is assassinated, whatever happens, something that radically changes the way the war is going, if it just continues on this trajectory, we're not going to see a one day where it's declared over. We're going to see a muddling down. We're going to see the IDF holding positions in the Gaza Strip, maybe in the Syrian corridor, in the Philadelphia axis. And we're going to see a situation going into a prolonged stalemate. Unfortunately, that is the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict until maybe something changes. Without some sort of critical juncture that changes things, chances are we're just going to see the situation muddling down and staying as it is.
Hal, is there enough chatter going on about the day after plan?
Oh, there's a lot of chatter on the day after plan, but the problem is with anything like an insurgency, these things don't normally just end. There's been a couple of exceptions where there's a grand negotiation. I think of FARC in Colombia. I think of things that happened in El Salvador. There's been a couple of other instances. There is the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. That was a rather unique ending to one of the greatest insurgencies I think the world has ever seen in terms of, well, greatest in terms of it was big. It was horrific, but it was pretty big. I just don't see that here. And this is the problem that Israel has, and this problem that all the countries around Israel have in trying to shape this thing, which is who rules Gaza? Who's going to be there? The reason Hamas was in charge, albeit it was one election and then it was over, never had another one, was a complete lack of confidence in the Palestinian Authority. That just wasn't going to happen. Even in the West Bank, there's a great lack of confidence in the Palestinian Authority. So there's been talk, and of course, Israel is never going to let Hamas rule anything ever again. So what is in there? And there's been talk about some sort of technocratic Palestinian government that could be put in place, that was somewhat neutral in terms of this thing, not influenced by Fatah, not influenced certainly by Hamas or anything of that nature. And nobody's seen what it is. Everybody's been watching for this thing. We're a year into it. We just haven't seen this thing. But what's interesting, and I just want to point this out, and it goes back to your first question, if I may. Why did Hamas do this? Because they're about to get permanently marginalized in the Middle East. If Saudi Arabia had recognized Israel, Hamas is marginalized to a degree that politically it just pulls the rug out from under them. So they felt they had to do the attack. What's interesting is that Saudi Arabia is still leaving that strategic opening, saying, if you can come up with some solution where there's there's a Palestinian state, and they're leaving it pretty broad, we can join in with you. And at that point, you've seen the vision of the Abraham Accords, but you're also seeing a real check against anything you call the axis of resistance or Iranian influence across the region. So I don't know how it will end, but I do see some glimmer of hope in that the countries around Israel, despite all the harsh rhetoric, despite all the threats of things that they're going to do, those countries that have recognized Israel, allied with Israel, have not cut off relations with them. And Saudi Arabia still leaves the door open towards normalizing relations. And I just think that within that context, something can be achieved. I don't know what it is, but I think something can be achieved.